Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So this is a very sad day for many fans. The High Republic is officially coming to an end. It's an era I don't really talk about on my channel, apart from the Acolyte and Young Jedi Adventures. But we're talking about the main publishing initiative that started in 2021. And you know, while there were some gems, some pretty darn amazing novels, this wasn't the success that Lucasfilm had hoped. And now with the third and final phase being over, with Charles Soule's Trials of the Jedi, and the final comic run releasing as we speak, I wanted to do something of a retrospective, because this era had so much potential. Going back 200 years before the Phantom Menace, the storytelling possibilities were endless. And while there were some great stories, the book sale numbers show a steep decline as the initiative went on. It didn't get the eyeballs and the attention and the audience that it should have. And I definitely believe The Acolyte being the only exposure most fans had to that era was the final nail in the coffin. Because when you're talking about the wider Star Wars fandom, most fans don't do anything beyond watching the movies or the shows. If you're looking at the totality of the base, everyone watches the live action stuff. At least the movies, not everyone has Disney+. Then a certain percentage will watch the animated shows, and then an even smaller portion of them will seek out the books and the comics. And even then, in comparison to other new Star Wars releases, the High Republic is even more niche. And I'm not just making this up. A few months ago I made a video breaking down the numbers, and it shows that while the High Republic has a die-hard fan base, most Star Wars fans just shrugged and didn't care enough. And in terms of my own experience, I read the first book, Light of the Jedi, and then I mostly followed the High Republic through the comics. I dipped my toe here and there into some books in Phase 2, but there was just something about the universe that felt so unfamiliar to me. So when people say, well, this is the most prequel-era feeling thing that Disney Star Wars has done, I have to disagree. I didn't get that feeling whatsoever. And I'm not trying to offend any High Republic fans because everything is subjective and we all have our tastes. But I think for me there are two major criticisms. The first is that because this was a multimedia initiative, for many of the characters and subplots, you really have to be tuned in to every release. Because there are so many characters and many of them die pretty quickly, you can't skip a novel, you can't skip a comic book issue. And my second major criticism is that, to me, it really pushed the boundaries of what Star Wars is. Sometimes it just got really bizarre. I think one of the biggest things that really turned me off the High Republic was the introduction of the Drengir. We'll talk about some of the other villains later on, but these were gigantic, carnivorous, force-sensitive, wild space plants. And I'm someone who likes bizarre things in Star Wars. I was a big fan of the Galaxy of Fear Expanded Universe books, but at least the aim with that book series was to try and be ridiculous. The High Republic, by contrast, was presented as the flagship canon cornerstone of the centuries before the prequel trilogy. So as a precursor, it felt like a tonal clash. And I know it's a different era where the Republic is prosperous, but even the Jedi feel different. They don't talk or act like Jedi. They don't project the same mythic aura we're used to. They don't have the same mystique. They're more like adventuring sci-fi heroes with lightsabers than spiritual warrior monks. And don't get me wrong, different personalities are inevitable, but they don't feel like they're part of the same Jedi religion that we used to. And it's definitely not just a time period difference, because if you look at the Old Republic, the Jedi of that time period in the video games are much more rooted in George Lucas's archetypes. They feel like people who've devoted their lives to the Force, and even in casual settings, their conversations are more philosophical and formal. Even their conflicts are meaningful and full of ideological debate.
You command the Force. Without the guidance of the Council, how can you avoid falling to the dark side?
Well, I've managed to avoid it the last 20 years or so. Light side, dark side, they don't mean the same to me as they do to you.
I don't want to say the writers just don't understand Star Wars because that might be a bit harsh, and what Star Wars is subjective, but from my perspective, it doesn't feel like they have a good solid grasp of the universe that George Lucas created. And I suppose it's sad for me in the same way The Acolyte was, because I really wanted to like the High Republic. I gave it my best shot. Had I forced myself to read every single novel, maybe I'd feel differently about it, but compared to some other releases like Brotherhood or The Mask of Fear, I just wasn't as compelled to pick up every new High Republic book. And maybe there is something to be said about the timing of the release. The first book came out at the start of 2021, when Star Wars fans were still really hyped about Mando. Conversely, that might have been the reason the first book did better than the rest. Fan interest overall was at an all-time high. But despite the decline since, we mustn't forget the original High Republic announcement was met with a lot of fan anticipation. The first announcement was a huge deal. It had its own press conference, a trailer video, interviews, tons of articles on StarWars.com, and at least at launch, the High Republic was a pretty lavish affair. There was even once an entire YouTube show dedicated to the project. But over the years, as fan frustrations with Lucasfilm grew, so did the apathy towards the books. And there is another major factor which is a bit more controversial but can't really be denied. When they really got the ball rolling for the High Republic, it was around the same time as the firing of Gina Carano. And so Star Wars fans went to the Star Wars YouTube channel, disliked tons of their videos, and vented that anger in the comment section. And as Culture State says, this made Lucasfilm reconsider their entire approach to YouTube content. The High Republic show faded into the abyss, and the promotion of new books really slowed down. Things were never the same after that. And so while people argue it was The Last Jedi, or The Kenobi Show, or The Acolyte, I think people are forgetting just how much tension there was when Gina was fired. And so what I'm saying is that that drama coincided with the release of the High Republic. And so now in 2025, is the High Republic really finished? Well, according to Lucasfilm Publishing in San Diego, the answer is no. They said, quote, "We're at the end of this initiative, not the end of this era. We know there is an upcoming game, Star Wars Eclipse. There's another season of Young Jedi adventures to come, and maybe someday they will return to the characters of the Acolyte." And here's something very interesting, my friends. In the first issue of the finale, the final High Republic comic run, Lucasfilm gave us a new look at the heroes of Young Jedi Adventures. We have Nubs, Kai Brightstar, and Liss. Animated characters from a kid's show appearing in serious comics. That's pretty massive. But it's finally coming to an end. And so how does the fandom feel about this? What is the overall sentiment? Well, my friends, in my research for this video, I scoured the internet and I noticed similar themes, similar complaints, and similar grievances. A recurring one is best summarized in this comment. Good books, but insanely hard to keep track of the plots through all the different media. Also a bunch of interesting characters, but they were also hard to keep track of because many were immediately killed off or reduced to minor roles in the next book. And then there are those who say, after the first book, the focus changed and things went downhill. This person says, "I remember reading Light of the Jedi and being super interested in Avar Kriss. Kept picking up more books and was bummed when she was only ever mentioned and rarely appeared. This was back in phase 1. Later I learned she mainly showed up in the comics. Kinda killed my interest in the whole thing once I realized how fractured some of the storylines and characters would be." And then there are those who say, it's not a High Republic thing, it's a Star Wars thing. They kill everyone interesting as they start to get interesting. This YouTube comment says, "It was the High Republic villains for me. Absolutely uninteresting and cliche, no real stakes." And this was one of my criticisms too. Because they couldn't do anything overt with the Sith, I guess they could have showed them to us in hiding, but they didn't. We got sentient carnivorous plant monsters called the Drengir and the Nile Marauders. So compared to the grand ideological villains like in the Skywalker saga, some fans feel as though these were pretty underwhelming. And the craziest thing is that when the High Republic's been mentioned in other projects, especially live action and further down the timeline, it's been made to sound far more interesting than what we got. For instance, the references in Skeleton Crew. Imagine an adventure about Tak Renaud, the legendary brutal pirate, traveling the galaxy with SM-33, or maybe a story about Tartatin and the Jewels of the Republic. But Lucasfilm's priorities have changed. Things are going to be very different compared to the days of the early 2020s. The focus is now on the movies, and tie-in material to the movies. But now I want to ask you guys, have you read The High Republic? What was your favorite book or comic? And if you didn't like it or didn't read it, what are your reasons? Did it not appeal to you? Share your thoughts down below.